Obviously, they could go back and look at the recording. There's a camera right there. There's also a backup digital recording that I'm doing. It fails me the second I try and trust it always fails me. So you said that your cell phone, is it off right now?
Yeah.
That would be great, because we can't have anything like buzzing, vibrating, ringing, that kind of stuff. So this will take at least a couple hours to do the polygraph, just because it's a real structured type of interview process. I have to go through a bunch of things with you. You're going to get the same polygraph that I gave someone last week. So it's very structured, and we go, in order and that kind of stuff. And you're going to know the wording to all of the questions I'm going to ask you on the test before we even take the polygraph. So don't. A lot of people come in here and they think, oh, they're just going to, attach all these components to me and then just start asking me random questions that I've never heard before, and of course I'm going to react to that. That's not at all how polygraph works. And you're actually going to probably know more about polygraphs than anyone before you leave here today, just because I explain everything to you and how everything works, okay? Obviously, you're probably nervous about taking today's test. Honestly, I would think something is wrong with you if you weren't nervous about coming in here to take a polygraph. Yeah. Even if people are like, I don't have anything to hide, it is nerve-wracking. And I have taken tons of polygraphs, obviously, in my training. I went to 10 weeks for training. I've been a polygrapher for about 5 years. I went to the best school in the country. So I want you to have confidence in the fact that if you had nothing to do with this disappearance, like, we're going to find that out today, okay? I have the best training that they offer in the United States. We use the most validated testing, the way I'm going to ask you the questions. So believe me, if you had nothing to do with this, I will be able to show them that today, okay? So that should give you some confidence that, this is how, you're going to be cleared today if you had nothing to do with it, okay? There's actually only, nervousness or anxiety cannot cause you to fail a polygraph. A lot of people think that too, that if they're really nervous that it could cause them to fail. If that were the case, no one would be allowed to take polygraphs, because every single person is nervous or anxious about taking the polygraph, okay?
I thought that's how it worked.
On nervousness? Yeah. No. There's actually only 2 ways you can fail a polygraph, okay? The first way would be if you fail to follow my instructions. I'm going to give you a lot of instructions today about how to sit still, how to answer questions, things like that. So if you fail to follow those instructions, you will not pass today's test, okay? The second way would be if you choose to lie to me today. Lie to me today, okay? Obviously, this is about 100% truth. Even if there's, something that you didn't tell the investigators, since Monday, I guess, is when the police were involved. If there's something that you didn't tell them since Monday, that is totally fine. I get it. People aren't going to remember every single detail every time they talk to someone. As long as you tell me what the truth is today, you will have no problem with passing, okay? I promise you that. And obviously, I hope that, if you did have something to do with their disappearance, it would be really stupid for you to come in and take a polygraph today.
Exactly.
Right? It would be really dumb. You should not be here right now sitting in this chair if you had anything to do with Shanann and the little girl's disappearance. Okay? Okay. And it's Celeste and Bella, is that right?
Yeah, I'll call her CC too.
CC, okay.
If that comes up.
Okay, perfect. So, and I know very small amount about the case.
Okay.
Just because I want to know less about the case, because I want you to be able to tell me about the case. I don't want to have some preconceived notions about the case, and that's why I don't want you to assume that I already know details because you told Detective so-and-so, that kind of stuff. I want you to be able to tell me like you were
Chris Watt sat alone in the stark interview room, the hum of the fluorescent lights echoing louder than his own heartbeat. The chair beneath him seemed too large, too cold, as if the room itself rejected his presence. He folded his hands together, unfolding them, repeating the motion over and over. His eyes moved everywhere except toward the camera watching silently from the corner. The door clicked open, and the detectives walked in with polite smiles masking razor-sharp suspicion. They greeted him casually, the way someone greets a man they already believe is lying. Chris tried to smile back, but it came out stiff and forced. He spoke about Shanann, about the children, about how he just wanted them home. His voice should have been trembling, but it wasn't. Instead, it floated in that room with a strange, hollow calmness that didn't match the panic of a man whose family had vanished hours earlier. The detectives listened, nodding, writing notes that weren't really about his words but about the unnatural stillness of the man speaking. He described the morning of their disappearance, but every sentence felt rehearsed, like lines he memorized minutes before stepping onto a stage. When they asked him simple questions, what Shannon was wearing, what time she got home, Chris paused too long, searching for answers that should have come naturally. A bead of sweat crawled down his temple, and he wiped it away quickly, hoping they wouldn't notice. But they noticed everything. Every blink. Every delayed breath. Every crack forming in the facade he was struggling to maintain. The detectives leaned back, letting silence fill the room. Silence is a powerful tool, it exposes the unstable. Chris shifted, swallowed hard, and repeated his story with slight changes that did not go unnoticed. The atmosphere grew heavier with each passing second. And if you're following this moment, watching the unraveling of a truth hiding behind shaking hands and nervous glances, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share, so you never miss stories where darkness tries to disguise itself as innocence. By the time the detectives stepped out of the room again, they already had their first certainty: something was very wrong with Chris Watt's story. The detectives returned with a different energy, no longer easing into small talk but circling with quiet precision. They asked Chris to go over the timeline again, every detail, every movement of that morning. His leg bounced beneath the table, tapping lightly at first, then faster as the questions tightened around him. When they asked about his marriage, Chris hesitated, eyes drifting to the wall as if the paint could offer him a lifeline. He spoke about distance, about trying to fix things, but the detectives heard what he wasn't saying: the resentment, the tension, the secrets swirling beneath calm words. Each question became sharper. What time did Shannon come home? What did they talk about? Why didn't the neighbors hear anything strange? Chris's answers floated in circles, never landing cleanly. The detectives exchanged small glances, collecting his slips like scattered puzzle pieces. Chris rubbed his hands together, wiped his palms on his jeans, and swallowed hard when they suddenly asked whether he would be willing to take a polygraph test. He nodded too quickly, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Minutes later, the polygraph examiner walked in with a warm, almost cheerful tone. Her presence filled the room with a different kind of pressure, kind, but slicing gently through pretenses. She explained everything: the process, the expectations, the honesty required. Chris nodded, blinking fast, trying to appear cooperative. But a thin line of sweat glistened along his jaw, betraying the fear behind his rehearsed calm. She made him practice breathing, answering simple questions, and even those seemed to strain him. Each wire attached to his body felt like a truth he could no longer outrun. The detectives watched from behind the glass, noting how his chest rose too quickly, how his fingers twitched with every answer. And as this tension builds, if you're following the case and want more deep dives into stories hidden beneath calm exteriors, remember to subscribe, like, and share to support Grave Secret, where we uncover truths buried behind the darkest lies. The chapter closes with Chris feeling the weight of the machine strapped to him, unaware that this test would become the beginning of his unraveling. Chris Watts had finished the polygraph, but the sense of relief he hoped for never arrived. The examiner re-entered with a calm but firm demeanor, her eyes scanning the results as if they were a roadmap to a secret he didn't want revealed. "Chris," she said gently, yet with an unmistakable authority, "the results indicate deception." His face went pale, lips parting in a faint, shaky smile that immediately faltered. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in with every passing second. The detectives leaned forward, voices low but pointed, pushing him toward the edge of a truth he had worked so hard to conceal. "Tell us everything you remember," one said, letting the silence linger before he spoke again. Chris blinked rapidly, his mind racing, trying to patch the cracks in the story he had spun for hours. He repeated lines about Shannon, about the children, about how he didn't hurt them, but this time the words sounded hollow, shadows of a story losing its hold. His hands shook, gripping the table, then loosening, then grabbing again. The silence between questions was deafening, filled only by the subtle hum of the lights and the soft scribbles of pens on paper. Every attempt to explain himself twisted tighter, and with each correction, his composure crumbled further. He stammered, paused, and sometimes fell silent altogether, staring at nothing, the weight of what he carried pressing down like a physical force. Chris's voice eventually lowered to a whisper, almost pleading, Can I talk to my dad?" And at that moment, the detectives exchanged knowing glances. They had reached a point where the facade could no longer hold. And if this chilling unraveling of lies is gripping you, make sure to subscribe, like, and share, so Graves' Secret can bring more stories where the truth refuses to stay buried. The chapter ends with Chris alone for a brief moment, awaiting his father's entrance, unaware that the next conversation would strip him of any remaining defenses and bring him one step closer to the full, horrifying confession. Chris's father stepped into the room, his presence a fragile tether to reality. Chris's composure, already hanging by threads, shattered instantly. His shoulders slumped, and his eyes, once guarded and rehearsed, now glistened with a raw vulnerability. "Dad," he whispered, voice cracking under the weight of emotions he had tried to suppress. The detectives allowed the moment to breathe, knowing that when a man's mask falls in front of someone he trusts, even partially, the truth begins to seep through. Chris began speaking in fragments, blaming Shanann, claiming panic, twisting events into a version he hoped would absolve him. Every word betrayed the tension between the story he wanted to tell and the reality he could no longer contain. His father listened, shocked, trying to reconcile the image of the son he knew with the chilling narrative unraveling before him. He reached out instinctively, placing a hand on Chris's arm, but it did little to steady the storm within. The detectives interjected with careful precision, guiding him through contradictions, pressing him on inconsistencies, and letting him speak just enough to expose the cracks in his lies. Chris shifted, wiped tears from his face, and stumbled over explanations that only deepened the sense of dread hanging in the room. Every false claim, every attempt at deflection, was met with quiet observation, a mirror reflecting the full extent of his unraveling. And as this intense confession continued, remember to subscribe, like, and share, so Graves' Secret can continue uncovering the darkest stories hidden behind ordinary lives. By the end of this chapter, Chris's initial attempt at a fabricated story had all but crumbled. The detectives were now collecting the pieces of truth he left behind, the father sitting frozen between disbelief and horror. The room, once a neutral space for interrogation, had become a stage where guilt, fear, and sorrow played out in stark, haunting clarity. Chris's journey toward the full confession was accelerating, the shadows of his lies retreating under the unforgiving light of relentless questioning, and the reality of his actions becoming impossible to deny. The room had grown heavy with tension, every word spoken by Chris sinking him deeper into the weight of his own guilt. Detectives leaned in with evidence that could not be ignored, GPS data, timestamps, surveillance footage from neighbors. Each piece shattered the fragile narrative he had been clinging to, exposing the stark contrast between his story and the reality he had tried to hide. Chris's voice faltered, rising and falling with desperation, the rehearsed calmness of hours earlier completely gone. He shifted in his chair, his hands trembling on the table as if holding onto it could anchor him to a world where his crimes didn't exist. Every denial became weaker, every excuse thinner, and soon he was silent, the lies he had meticulously crafted collapsing under the pressure of facts. The detectives pressed gently but firmly, methodically untangling the web of deception he had spun, guiding him toward the truth that refused to stay buried. Chris's eyes darted around the room, the fear and realization merging into an almost tangible presence. The man who had once portrayed himself as a desperate father now sat defeated, understanding fully that the walls of the interview room had become his confessional. He inhaled sharply, exhaled shakily, and finally admitted the horrifying reality, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to obscure the truth. And as this chilling conclusion unfolds, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share, so Grave Secret can continue bringing you stories where darkness is exposed and truth refuses to be silenced. The interview ended not with a dramatic flourish, but with silence, heavy, suffocating, and unforgettable. Chris Watts was escorted from the room, his steps slow, the weight of his actions pressing down with every movement.